The Iron Lady and the affairs. Just how true are those stories? As ever, let me explain. Morning, chums. Nice to see you. Thank you so much for your time today. When you think about big leaders, you do think, of course, don't you, about Margaret Thatcher, particularly in our generation, and of course others like Winston Churchill. There are many in the sort of annals of history, of course, and you look back at all the great British prime ministers. I like the fact that Disraeli was very clever at manipulation around Queen Victoria. He made her laugh a lot and he played the fool, and so consequently he could get away with a lot more, for instance, than say other people did. Personality can go a long way. What's interesting about this particular story is, of course, now in a brand new serialized book, that apparently the late Margaret Thatcher, the first lady female prime minister over here in the United Kingdom for 3 successive periods, well, apparently she was less than faithful to her devoted Dennis. Let me explain. I was lucky enough to meet Margaret Thatcher on a couple of occasions, and I don't know if I've ever mentioned this before, but the thing is, I got quite friendly with her daughter, Carol, and we were working at the same TV station, and Carol would come in to do the newspaper reviews. Lovely girl, got on really well with a great, cracking sense of humour, very articulate, a lot of fun, and didn't take herself too seriously. She told me the story about when she used to get dropped off as a teenager and would say to the cab driver, "Oh, just drop me by 10 Downing Street." And he said, "No, I'll drop, where do you live?" And she said, "No, I live in 10 Downing Street." And apparently nobody ever believed her. Because she said, they thought, "Oh, don't be ridiculous." This was in an era, of course, where people didn't have social media, possibly didn't know what the offspring looked like, but she was just good fun. Margaret Thatcher I met on a couple of occasions. The first time around, once up at a conference in Blackpool where I was working up there, and then latterly at a TV studio in Westminster. And it just shows what a nice lady she was, because she was very ill at the time, very much struggling with her health, but came in to record a very special message for one-time sort of combative counterpart, the wonderful broadcaster David Frost, because he was retiring from his BBC Sunday morning breakfast show, Breakfast with Frost. So it says a lot about what she thought about individuals. Now, this brand new book, which just coincides with the 100th birthday of the former Right Honourable Margaret Thatcher, basically alludes to the fact that very early on in her parliamentary career that she had numerous affairs, predominantly 2. And not only that, the husband Dennis, you remember Dennis Thatcher, met him, I thought he was a terrific guy actually. Didn't he just sail through it brilliantly? Never ever got ruffled, never got himself into trouble, that sort of thing. What was interesting about this, and this is just my take on this, remember, but you see, there's 2 things. I got to know a lot of people, particularly the security team, very well that worked alongside Margaret Thatcher for many years. I also knew her official press officer, Bernard Ingham, do you remember him? And all of those people, at that time were ready to tell stories, particularly when Mrs. Thatcher had passed away. And I don't mean that in a nasty way, positive stories, that sort of stuff, but mainly about her working background. And the one thing that they pointed out was her devotion to her Dennis, right? They were very much a twosome, a very much gelled twosome. Now, what I find, and I've often said this about, the era that we now live in, when you write a book like that, and you suddenly say to yourself, well, here's this story, who could she have met? It's very loose. And while people are going on record of saying, well, I heard the rumour, there is no tangible 100% foolproof evidence. Margaret Thatcher was very feminine behind the scenes, and she used her feminine wiles very cleverly, ladies, to make sure that she got her own way. Always beautifully attired, the lipstick was on, the hair was coiffured, the perfume was out, and she could become, according to the sources that I knew, very, very persuasive in a feminine way if she wanted you to do something. My perception is that these 2 particular individuals that are alleged affairs no longer with us, so they can't answer back, remember. This would be Margaret applying that theory. You get the picture. And so consequently, the story about Mandy Rice Davies and Dennis Thatcher was simply born out of a meeting and that was a meeting many, many years later. And consequently, Mandy herself, I met her not too long before she died, actually, at the premiere of Stephen Ward, a musical all about that particular Perfumo scandal. And she told me that she was very good friends with the Thatchers, and they'd been nothing but supportive, kind, and helped her in many different ways, both of them together. So again, while you're trying to sell a book and you say, this is what happened, without 100% definitive proof, then it's like a lot of these big biographies. It's all out there, isn't it? But there are no people to come back and say that never happened. Now, I wonder what Mrs. Thatcher would say to these stories about her being something of a, well, surprise sex bomb. Even I think she might laugh at that. Let me know what you think in this particular comments below. Do you believe the story, or do you believe, of course, that the dead simply can't answer back? Neil Sean, Kensington, London.